Another rate cut from the Bank of Canada, while politicians spar over the country's finances. This is Now You Know. I'm Rob Snow.
Going beyond the headlines.
Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
Well, the Bank of Canada is pulling the trigger again, cutting interest rates by 50 basis points. That brings the bank's trend-setting overnight lending rate down to 3.25%, down from a recent high of 5%, where it stood between July of 2023 and April of this year. Since then, the bank has lowered its policy rate 5 times by a total of 175 basis points, and this is the second time in a row that the Bank of Canada has opted for the jumbo rate hike. The governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, at a news conference in Ottawa today, he said inflation is back where the bank likes to see it. The goal is to keep it there, and the weakness in the employment market played a role in today's decision.
Canada's job market is still softening. Businesses have continued hiring, but the number of people looking for work has been increasing faster than the number of jobs. The unemployment rate rose to 6.8% in November. It has been especially hard for young people and newcomers to Canada to find work.
So is the Bank of Canada finished cutting rates? Could even lower interest rates be on the way? Macklem said there are things in the new year the Bank of Canada will have to take into consideration, like cuts to immigration and the plans from the Trudeau government for a GST holiday and the plan to send millions of Canadians one-time payments of $250. So we'll have to wait for the new year.
A number of policy measures have been announced that will affect the outlook for growth and inflation in the months ahead. The most significant of these is reduced immigration targets, which suggest GDP growth next year will be lower than we forecast in October. The effects of lower population growth on inflation will likely be more muted because reduced immigration dampens both demand and supply in the economy. We'll have more to say on this when we release our next forecast in January. Other federal and provincial government policies, including a temporary GST break on some consumer products, one-time payments to individuals, and changes to mortgage rules, will likely affect the dynamics of household spending and inflation in the months ahead. Again, we'll have more to say on this in January.
There were expectations the Canadian dollar would move lower on this news because of the difference between interest rates in Canada compared to the United States, where the U.S. Federal Reserve has been moving more slowly at cutting rates. And Governor Macklem said the story isn't so much about a weak Canadian dollar, but a U.S. dollar that is stronger against most major currencies.
The U.S. dollar has been strong against pretty much every other currency. If you look at the Canadian dollar against other crosses relative to major currencies other than the U.S. dollar, it's actually very little changed. The fact that the Canadian dollar is weaker, as you said, that is actually one of the channels through which monetary policy works. A lower Canadian dollar makes Canadian exports more competitive in the U.S., and so that will add demand to the Canadian economy. It also makes imported goods more expensive, so that can also have some impact on inflation. So those are both things that we will need to take into account in the conduct of monetary policy. Until recently, the Canadian dollar has actually been remarkably stable. We have seen some depreciation. That is something we'll have to factor in.
Canadian dollar trading right now at 70.78 cents U.S., up slightly on the day by about 25 basis points. While the Bank of Canada is cutting interest rates, politicians in Ottawa continue to battle over the government's finances, a debate that has only grown more intense in recent days, since a report in the Globe and Mail suggests there is tension between Prime Minister Trudeau and his Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland. The paper reported the recent GST holiday and the plan for the $250 checks in the new year didn't go over well in the Department of Finance because of what it would do to the deficit. Unnamed sources told the paper the decision to push ahead with those measures came from the Prime Minister's office. As you can imagine, the opposition Conservatives are having a field day with that, wondering who's in charge of the government's finances. This is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has admitted that deficits drive inflation. His minister admitted the same thing. That's why she said the deficit would not go above $40 billion. That was her guardrail. They weren't going to smash into that guardrail. She's like a bus driver saying she's going to come just short of hitting that $40 billion guardrail. And then some crazy lunatic comes in, grabs the steering wheel, and jerks it sharp to the left through the guardrail. Does he realize there's 41 million Canadians that are going to go off the cliff in that bus?
When asked by news reporters about that report in the Globe and Mail about tension between her office and the Prime Minister's office, Chrystia Freeland wouldn't comment on the report and wouldn't reveal the true size of the deficit. She would only say she wouldn't comment on rumors.
I am not going to comment on anonymous rumors that are out there in the town right now. No, I'm not going to comment on anonymous rumors that are out there in the town. I offered something very clear information on what I expect when it comes to the debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio is our fiscal anchor. That is it's not just the guarantee of fiscal sustainability, that is fiscal sustainability, and it was important for me to be clear about that today. The other thing that I do want to say is from the time that following the COVID recession, Canada experienced global inflation and the high interest rates which followed, our government's focus has been on supporting the Bank of Canada in getting inflation down and then interest rates down. And so the fact that that inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for all of this year is material.
In other financial/political news, the government will continue to be supplied with funding. Last night, MPs voted on some supply bills. More than $21 billion worth of government funding passed through the House. That was cutting it close. Those votes needed to happen before midnight last night, or some government departments would have faced a funding shortfall. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
Critical thinking is not dead.
Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio.
Let's get more into the reasons behind the Bank of Canada's decision today to lower interest rates again for the fifth time in a row. Sal Guatieri is back with us, senior economist and director at BMO Capital Markets. Thanks for joining us again. Good to hear from you.
Thank you, Rob.
So it's the jumbo move again, Sal, 50 basis points to the downside. What did you think of the decision?
Well, not much of a surprise, that's for sure, after that weak jobs report that sent the unemployment rate up to 6.8%. So it's up 2 full percentage points from its low of a couple of years ago. And the bank can even mention that the economy has been underperforming its expectations for the last little while now, and it's kind of factoring in the fact that slower population growth next year will dampen the economy a bit, and perhaps as some protection against the threat of tariffs. The Bank of Canada saw that need to pull off a back-to-back 50 basis point rate reduction. So we have the bank now one of the most aggressive rate-cutting central banks in the world now, with rates down 175 basis points in just 6 months. So that wasn't surprising. The surprise, though, was the Bank of Canada basically signaled that we're likely heading towards a slower pace of easing going forward, maybe even an extended pause in the rate-cutting cycle. The Bank of Canada does believe interest rates now are much less restrictive than they were several months ago. So, with rates now just over 3%, that's certainly much more restrictive than at 5% earlier this summer. So it's basically sees the need, if there are further rate cuts, to more fine-tune rather than to cut in big steps. So we're probably talking, we've probably seen the last after the 50 basis point rate cuts. We're probably talking 25 basis points going forward. We do anticipate 3 more rate cuts through next year, all of the 25 basis point variety. So we could be sitting at 2.5% by the summer of next year.
Okay. On the immigration, that was the first thing cited by the governor of the Bank of Canada today during his briefing in Ottawa, that the reductions announced by the government in immigration levels played a factor in this decision to lower interest rates. Why would what's behind that, Sal? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, clearly was a factor in the Bank of Canada going 50 basis points today, because they were debating whether to go 50 again or just shift back to 25 basis point rate cut. But they did settle on the bigger move. And one of the reasons is because they know the government's plans now to dramatically curb immigration over the next 2 years, to the point where if the government is effective and executes properly, we could actually see the population shrink or contract slightly for a couple of years. So from 3% annual growth down to nothing, if and perhaps even a slight contraction. So that would have economic implications. Now, we're pretty skeptical on whether the government can achieve that. We are still assuming some positive population growth, but clearly much weaker than 3%. And that could have some dampening effect on the economy, certainly suggests a downside risk. So that was a factor for the Bank of Canada to move aggressively in cutting rates today.
What could this mean for the labor market? You mentioned the jobs report that was out on Friday. It wasn't very good, but the economy did create 50,000 jobs. It's just not enough to keep up with population growth. So could this reduction in immigration actually improve the labor market? What do you think?
Well, it will, yes, because the vast majority of the 2 percentage point rise in Canada's unemployment rate in the past couple of years or so is simply due to torrid population growth driven by immigration, which accounts for basically all of our population growth. And that's why our labor force was growing so strongly in the past couple of years. And businesses really just could not keep up with that kind of inflow to our labor force. Still created over 300,000 jobs in the past year, which normally would push the unemployment rate lower. But because the labor force was growing so much faster than job creation, we did see the jobless rate go up. So the Bank of Canada, the good news is that slower population growth will relieve some of the upward pressure on the unemployment rate, and we could peak out around 7% early next year. But then the unemployment rate should start to drift down, both because of the slower population growth and some pickup in the economy, which will be directly tied to today's rate cut and the full 175 basis points of rate cuts since the summer.
Okay. Very quickly, what do you see ahead for the Canadian dollar? It's up today. A lot of people didn't think it would be up today, but it's up today. What's ahead for our currency?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the currency is just earned a brief respite because of the Bank of Canada's signal that it will likely shift to a slower pace of rate reductions and maybe even pause for a while. But the fact of the matter is Canada's economy does need even lower interest rates. And the Bank of Canada itself has said that they're aiming for stronger economic growth. It's the only way really to get the unemployment rate back down. And to prevent inflation from actually moving below the 2% target and staying there. So to defend that 2% target, the Bank of Canada needs stronger economic growth. They probably are planning or aiming for at least a couple more rate cuts. We see 3 more rate cuts. So, for the most part, we think the Bank of Canada is still biased towards easing, and that will be a real challenge for the Canadian dollar, especially against the U.S. dollar, especially if the Fed, because inflation is stickier in the U.S., the U.S. economy is stronger, the U.S. unemployment rate is much lower than in Canada, may not see the need to cut interest rates all that much further. That will be a big challenge for the Canadian dollar, given that interest rate spreads are already more than a full 100 basis points, which is providing a lot of support to the U.S. dollar.
Thanks for your time today, Sal Guatieri. Great to hear from you.
Take care, Rob.
Senior Economist Director at BMO Capital Markets.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
So, David, a lot of news that is money related today. Of course, the Bank of Canada cutting interest rates. So, that's good news unless you're worried that the Bank of Canada is doing that because of signs of economic weakness. But, if you're in the market for a mortgage, renewing your mortgage, it's good news. A cut today of 50 basis points. If you're one of those crypto people, I am not a crypto person, but Bitcoin is on the run again today, I noticed, David.
Oh, yes, it is.
Right, back above $100,000 US, $100,751 US today for one Bitcoin. Bitcoin is up year to date 2024 with only a couple of weeks left until the new year. Bitcoin has rallied by 56,000 US dollars, is up 128%, David. 128%.
Yeah, the run it's been on since the U.S. election is just nuts. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah. And Elon Musk is doing pretty well these days. I was thinking about this. I'm looking at the billionaire index that's compiled every day by Bloomberg News, the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, and they track the fortunes of the uber wealthy every day. And there's Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, and he's doing okay. He's the third wealthiest person in the world with a net worth today of almost $220 billion. Okay. And then just ahead of him, you have a guy by the name of Jeff Bezos, and he created a company called Amazon.
Heard of it.
I'm sure is, doing okay. And his net worth, $244 billion. But imagine this, you're Mark Zuckerberg, you're third on the list, your net worth is $220 billion, and the guy who's first on the list has twice as much money as you do. That's where Elon Musk is now. Elon Musk, it's just kind of moving today, has now become the first person ever to reach $400 billion of net worth. $400 billion. According to Bloomberg, it's $439.2 billion. David, isn't that insane? Tesla has been on a run since the election. That's up 65% on the stock market since the election. He has this AI company, XAI. That's worth $50 billion. But on Wednesday, they had a share sale, an insider share sale. If you were an insider, you could buy shares in SpaceX. And that values SpaceX at $350 billion. It's the most valuable private technology startup in the world, $350 billion. And that added in one day to Elon Musk's total fortune, $50 billion. In one day, David. How's that for a day's work? Not bad, eh?
I think increasingly, Rob, we may have gone into the wrong business here.
I think so. Yeah, I guess so. Elon Musk, worth in excess of $400 billion.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio. The Newsday Panel.
It is time for our Newsday Panel with Jordan Paquette, Senior Consultant at Blue Sky Strategy Group. How are you today, Jordan?
Great, Rob. Great to be back.
Good. Yeah, it's great to hear from you. Chris Day was supposed to join us from Winston-Wilmot, but he's on a plane. He got stuck on a plane. His plane was supposed to have landed by now, but, it's that time of year. Time of travel delays, I guess you could say. So we're kind of going it solo. David's going to join us, of course. David, who you hear on this show, David Smith, and frequent contributor to the Big Story podcast as well. So let's jump into a few things here. Donald Trump, I don't know what to make of this. Donald Trump is clearly trolling Justin Trudeau with another social media post about Justin Trudeau being governor of the 51st state. Meantime, you have Justin Trudeau at an event claiming the election loss suffered by Kamala Harris is a sign that the rights of women are under attack, which I found kind of strange. How would you describe kind of what's happening right now between the Canadian government and the incoming Trump administration, Jordan? What's going on here? What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting on both sides. I mean, Trump for sure is definitely trolling Trudeau. I mean, first when Trudeau first went down to Mar-a-Lago, Trump posted and said, "Oh, I had a quote interesting guest last night." You know, they were naming him in the NBC interview. Trump said that Trudeau jumped on a plane within 15 seconds and was heading down after his call. Trump is negotiating right now from a position of major strength. He just won an election where he won the popular vote and electoral vote. He won both houses of Congress. So he has sort of the ability to now negotiate from this position of strength. Trudeau, on the other hand, by all accounts, is likely on his way out of prime minister, whether it's on his own volition and he leaves or he gets voted out. But he still has a job to do, and that's stand up for the rights of Canadians. And I mean, it is good to see that he's trying to make these overtures and this outreach. But then you see something like last night, where he goes to a gala and then says these things about the last two women losing the election, who both lost to Trump. And Trump's always watching, whether he's seen it himself and reading Canadian articles, maybe not, but someone will bring it to his attention, and I think this tit for tat will continue, which is unfortunate.
What did you think of that,
everybody.
David? What did you think of that, David, when you saw that?
Well, I don't like it, obviously. You know, when I saw the tweet calling him the governor of this 51st state,
51st state.
It's just, as a Canadian, it rubs me the wrong way. It really does. But the way I see it, it's kind of like, the way off before the UFC fight. The two fighters are standing there face to face and they're mean mugging at each other and sizing each other up. As Jordan says, we're about to head into a very contentious trade negotiation with the Trump administration. And it's obvious that Trump sees Trudeau as a lightweight. He's setting a bit of a hostile tone here right off the top. And Trudeau's own goals just keep stacking up. I cannot understand the logic of continuing to poke Donald Trump now that he's actually been elected. As Jordan says, he's always watching. Every time anyone in the world says something about Donald Trump, it will get back to him. He's an egomaniac. He's obsessed with that stuff. And Trudeau's skills as, a classic statesman don't match up well with Donald Trump. He's a bull in a china shop. He's a cutthroat businessman. He's not a classic statesman. So I think Trudeau and his team are doing their best to try and just tread water before they even get to swim. But the impression so far to me is that Trump's going to walk all over Trudeau.
Okay, let's turn our attention a little bit to the leader of the opposition, the person with the 20-point lead in the polls, Pierre Poilievre, because it's being suggested that it's time for Pierre Poilievre to go to the United States, to go to Washington, and really start trying to build some relationships with people in Trump's inner circle. People are going to be part of the new administration, key members of Congress. What do you think about that idea? Mr. Poilievre goes to Washington. Jordan?
So I think it's okay if they do. I mean, previous opposition leaders have. Ronna Ambrose went down for meetings, Andrew Scheer. They've gone to other countries too, like Israel, India, UK. But I don't think the average Canadian necessarily cares as much about whether the opposition leader goes to the U.S. or anywhere else. If Poilievre went down to Washington, for those that are criticizing for not going, and then criticized the Canadian government, said the border's broken and needs to be fixed, then the chattering class back here would be all up in arms again, saying that he broke that cardinal rule about how you can't criticize the government, your own government, on foreign soil. So I don't necessarily think for Poilievre he has to go. His job right now is to win the support of Canadians, and I think, as you mentioned, Rob, he's at 20 points ahead in the polls. I think that shows why. I think he's just very focused on winning the next election.
Yeah, he has to, in my own opinion, he has to kind of strike this balance right now. He's the leader of the opposition. His job is to oppose the government, to criticize the government, to point out flaws in the policies of the government. But he doesn't want to see as somebody who is talking down Canada and cheering for Trump. That's how I see it, and it's not an easy thing to do. What do you think, David?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because Poilievre has this really tough line that he needs to walk. He's got to somehow keep putting the screws to Trudeau and capitalizing on any shortcomings there, but he has to do that without coming off as being anti-Canada or un-Canadian. So obviously he'll need to go to Washington and start building those relationships, but is now the right time? I think he and his team are probably happy to stay out of the way as much as possible and let Trudeau wear the news cycle. If you think about it, if Poilievre goes down there tomorrow, what happens? It will spark at least 2 or 3 days of a news cycle, picking apart every word, every detail of the trip, every letter in whatever Trump posts about it afterwards, and that's a news cycle fully focused on Poilievre. So what's the political upside there for the Conservatives? I don't really see one.
Yeah, and plus I think Jordan, I like your take on this. I think Poilievre already kind of has his envoy in Jamil Jivani, the Southern Ontario MP, kind of new to the role of being an MP, but he knows the vice president pretty well. They went to law school together. They're friends. He's been there. Giovanni's already been there. So you have to think, Giovanni is probably talking about, well, this is Pierre Poilievre. This is who he is. This is what he stands for. And hopefully, J.D. Vance will relay that to Trump. That's kind of how I see it. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's other MPs as well. I mean, you have Randy Hoback, who, from the time when I was working with Rona Ambrose, I mean, he was down there for meetings all the time, cultivating these relationships. So it's not like these relationships don't exist. Whether Pierre goes or not doesn't make a difference. If Conservatives win the next election, they're going to have their own approach. They're going to have their own ministers. They're going to have their own foreign minister, trade minister. They'll have their own ambassadors and consuls general in every area and their own policy. And so, I mean, that legwork is already being done behind the scenes. It doesn't have to happen under this big tour of Poilievre going down to either Mar-a-Lago or to Washington or to wherever have you. I mean, the work's being done behind the scenes.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with the fall economic update, the size of the deficit, tension between Trudeau and Freeland, all when we come back. It's our Newsday panel. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. It's News Radio.
There is no question Rob won't get answered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues
on News Radio.
David Smith is here with me. So is Jordan Piquette, Senior Consultant, Blue Sky Strategy Group. Some of the big news stories today. One of the big news stories of the week has been this report in the Globe and Mail. Tension between Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau over the wisdom of this $6 billion plus affordability package, the 2-month GST holiday that will save you 65 cents on a rotisserie chicken, everyone. And then $250 sometime in your bank account, sometime in the new year, all told more than $6 billion. Chrystia Freeland said, my deficit will not exceed $40 billion. But nobody believes that anymore because if it was true, she would have said it's going to be true. And she hasn't said what the size of the deficit is going to be. We're going to find out on Monday. And now we have this story in the Globe and Mail. Well, it wasn't our idea. This came out of the Prime Minister's office. Wasn't our idea. We didn't think it was a good idea. Blame the PMO if the budget is too big. What do you think, Jordan? What's going on here?
Well, yeah, you'd like to hope some of these recent ideas didn't come from the Department of Finance, because I mean it's bad economic policy, and this is an awkward situation, and you can't help but feel something for Freeland. I mean, this is the second time in several months that we've seen reports of some of these senior Liberal sources talking about it on both sides. Last time it was they don't like how she delivers the economic message. She's not a good communicator. And now this time it seems to be pointing the blame back to PMO on
been meeting with Mark Carney, these kinds of things. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So it puts her in a very awkward position. And then, I mean, you go back to the time Trudeau himself saying he doesn't really care about fiscal policy. It's so, they're trying to spend as much as possible to win over as many votes. And now, we'll have this fiscal update on Monday. several days before the holiday season, so it's not going to give much time to scrutinize or to talk about. They want to blame the gridlock in Parliament, but frankly, she could have did this anytime in November, anywhere, basically, gone and spoke. She doesn't have to do it inside of Parliament. Previous finance ministers didn't. So it is a very awkward situation, and it just leads me to think that come time for cabinet shuffle, which is expected probably looking like into January now at this point, she may not be in that position anymore. This is similar to what happened with Bill Morneau. As soon as they fall out of favor with the PMO, it's only a matter of time before they're shuffled out. Now they'll make this about, we're going to refocus her attention on Canada-U.S. relationship. She was good at that and good at the negotiation part before. But at the end of the day, this just goes to show what happens when you run offside of this PMO.
Yeah. What did you think when you read that story in the Globe this week, David?
Well, it's just another proof point that this government in full-on desperation mode, isn't it? I mean, Freeland and Trudeau, whatever rift there is there seems to be widening. She didn't make it to the invite list to the impromptu dinner with Donald Trump. Lots of people noticed that she was absent there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know, Freeland is the minister of everything. She's the finance minister and the deputy prime minister, so she's got to be out there selling the political message, selling Canadians on big government, big spending programs. Then she has to go back to the office and figure out how to pay for all of those promises that she just made in front of the cameras. Of course, that's going to create tension. But what I think's really interesting is that there are so many people willing to talk to Bob Fife at the Globe and Mail about it. All of those anonymous sources, why are they leaking this stuff? What's their motivation? I can only speculate, but I know that if those people felt like their bosses were doing a good job and felt like they are likely to still be employed this time next year, they probably wouldn't be talking to Bob Fife about this stuff.
Yeah. I just can't wait to find out what the number is on Monday. Like, how big is this deficit? Is this number that's out there, say 60 billion or 60 billion, 62 billion, is that just a leak so that when it comes in at, like say it comes in at, I don't know, 52 billion or 55 billion, we think, well, that's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. But, I mean, like $60 billion, I mean, to put this in some perspective, I mean, that's bigger than some of the deficits that, well, it is bigger than all the deficits that Harper and Flaherty ran during the financial crisis years when they were bailing out the auto sector, for crying out loud. And you remember the economic action plan, and every highway was getting twinned and roads were being paved and roofs were being put on community centers, and you couldn't go 3 blocks without seeing a sign from the Harper government that said economic action plan, this project funded by the economic action plan. Well, those were deficits of, if I recall, like $55 billion. We're not in that kind of crisis anymore. COVID is in the rearview mirror. What is going on? The deficit, we're even talking about a $60 billion deficit. It's kind of crazy to me, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that Team Trudeau has made the political calculation that Canadians don't really care about debt and deficit. I think, you know, we've seen many times, whether it's provincially, federally, different people have tried to make it a political issue. I think it mattered to some in the past. But at the end of the day, they're now making the calculation that, if we eliminate the GST off pre-made chickens, as you said, or a case of beer, or a Christmas tree, or Hanukkah bush, or whatever that is, that they're going to come out and vote for us on these measures. And you know, whether the deficit's $40 billion, $100 billion, Canadians don't really care at the end of the day because we're giving them things out there. I think at this point in their tenure and in their mandate, that's some dangerous thinking on their part, because every single little thing now that they do is being criticized, and this is just going to be one of the others.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to wrap it up there for today, Jordan. Hey, thanks for the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great to hear from you.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Senior Consultant, Blue Sky Strategy Group, Jordan Piquette. I'm Rob Snow, here with David Smith on a Wednesday. Tell you what's coming up on Talkback, coming up here on News Radio.
You have questions.
Now you know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
Well, the Talkback is coming up right after the news at the top of the hour. Our call-in line, 1-833-668-2577. I mean, the Bank of Canada story is the big story today, the rate cut from the Bank of Canada. And usually when it comes to Bank of Canada Day, we like to talk about housing and housing-related issues and stories when the Bank of Canada is in the news, because so much of what the Bank of Canada does is tied to the housing situation in Canada, which has been difficult for a lot of people. And today's topic is housing affordability, David.
Yes.
I'll run with that today.
Yes.
Yeah. So our question is, what are you doing right now, or what have you done in the past in order to save money on housing, in order to make your housing costs more affordable? Like, for example, David, I've lived with roommates in the past. You ever live with roommates?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You did live with roommates?
Oh, yeah.
Like a lot of roommates?
No.
Or?
At one point, three. Two would have been the most. Just two. So three of us in the house.
Like you and two roommates, you mean?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of place was that?
It was a 2-bedroom apartment. For a while, we had somebody living on the couch.
Oh, really? Okay. Did you really? I had somebody living on the couch?
First year of college.
Yeah, my first year of university, David, I shared a bedroom with a roommate. Yeah. We didn't share a bed, but we shared a bedroom. Yeah, we were kind of like Bert and Ernie.
Yeah.
I would ask people, who, have owned homes, if they've ever taken in a tenant.
Yeah.
In order to help pay for the mortgage, and what that experience has been like. When I have not done that, but my parents did that. Took in a tenant. And that person did housework and took care of us. We were just little kids at the time in exchange for housing. They were a student going to nursing school at the time. Also, I mean, I would say this. Have you moved? Or have you thought about moving, say, to a different city or even a different province in order to save money on housing, to move to a less expensive place in order to take advantage of lower housing costs? Are you one of those people who kind of came to the conclusion, I can't really afford to live here anymore? I'm moving. I know people who have done that because I'm one of them. So we're going to talk about housing affordability, and things people do or have done in their lives to try and afford to stay housed. On the Talkback right after the news on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
And welcome to Talkback. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big issues of the day. And today's topic, housing affordability. Big news story in Canada today is this rate cut from the Bank of Canada, and that is so closely related to everything having to do with housing. So we thought it would just make sense to ask you some questions today about housing affordability. It's been a top issue for the last few years for so many Canadians. So here are some questions to think about, and then give us a call and share your experiences, share your stories with us. Our call-in line is 1-833-668-2577, 1-833-668-2577. What are you doing right now, or what have you done in the past in order to save money on housing and make your housing costs more affordable? What are you doing now, or what have you done in the past in order to save money on housing and make your housing costs more affordable? For example, have you lived with roommates in the past, or are you living with roommates now, and what's that like, and how's that going? If you're a homeowner, you have a mortgage, have you ever taken in tenants, rented out a room in your house in order to help pay the mortgage? And, what's that experience been like for you? Have you moved, or have you considered moving to a different city or a different province in order to save money on housing costs? I know a few people who have done that. In fact, I'm one of them. Have you come to the conclusion, you know what, I really can't afford to live here anymore. I think I'm going to move. Are you one of those people? You know someone who has done that, maybe a family member or a friend or a coworker? Are you thinking about doing that, maybe moving somewhere else? Because where you live right now is just too expensive? 1-833-668-2577, 1-833-668-2577. And parents out there, do you still have older children living at home? Children in their 20s, maybe even their 30s, so they can save money on housing? And how's that going? What's that like? All to say, in this expensive housing market, whether it's rents, whether it's housing prices themselves, what lengths are you going to in order to keep a roof over your head, in order to try and save money on housing? I mean, we could talk about all the numbers. We can talk about what rents are and what housing prices are and what a 5-year fixed mortgage rate is. And we can talk about all the housing policies, GST and development charges. And we can talk about interest rates and mortgage terms and urban sprawl and intensification and the pressures of high levels of immigration on the housing market. I'd much rather just kind of hear some personal stories, maybe even share some personal experiences about what it's like these days in order to try and stay housed. So I really hope you'll join the discussion today as we talk about housing, what you've done in the past in order to try to keep those costs down, in order to make your own housing situation fit within your own budget. I mean, I've had roommates in the past before. I don't anymore, but I've had many roommates in the past before. These days, just kind of me and my wife and the pets these days around here. But in the past, I've lived with people I've known for a long time. I've lived with total strangers who just answered an ad. Thankfully, in my own personal experience, I can't say I really have any, horror stories. I've heard a few over the years, but I don't really have any bad roommate stories. It's all kind of worked out for me. I've never taken in a tenant. But as I mentioned to David before the news, my parents did that for a while when we were just young children. They took in a tenant, a student, to keep costs down in the house. And that person did work around the house, childcare, and in exchange, cheap housing. And I have moved in order to find a place that was more affordable to me and, more kind of suitable to the kind of life I wanted to live. I have done that. I have fled the big city and to instead live in small town Canada. I did that in search of more affordable housing, quite frankly. I'm one of those people, and I have no regrets in doing so, and I can't really say that I miss big city life. But that's just me in a nutshell. And show's not about me. It's about you and your calls and your stories and your experiences and what you are doing, or what you have done in the past, or what your friends, your family members, your children are doing in order to make the housing situation more affordable these days. So every single phone line is available right now. We'd love to hear from you as we kick this around for a couple of hours. 1-833-668-2577. That's our calling line. 1-833-668-2577. And if you've never called before, just mention that to our call screener, and we will make your call a priority. It's the midweek edition of Talkback, and I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know, and this is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
It sure is. Housing affordability, our topic for the day. We are asking, what are you doing, or what have you done in the past in order to save money on housing? Let's get right to the phone lines, jam-packed phone lines. That's great to see. Ifo in Halifax, first-time caller. Good to hear from you. What's your housing affordability story, Ifo?
Oh, it is a story of creativity.
Okay.
Because
That's great.
They say what's the word? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes.
Yes. So I moved back to Halifax in 2016. as a poor, broke, recently graduated student.
From where?
And I moved to PEI to do a computer science degree, so I finished and then I moved back to Halifax.
Okay.
And so the rent had more than doubled from the last time that I was living in PEI or living in Halifax.
Right.
And so I couldn't afford a 1-bedroom. So I ended up getting a 4-bedroom.
Okay.
And the reason for that was because the cost per room for a 4-bedroom was lower than the cost per room for if I just wanted to get a 1-bedroom for myself.
Right.
So I talked to a couple of people who were also looking for 1-bedrooms and couldn't afford them and said, what if we just live together? So we ended up getting a 4-bedroom, and then we had an extra room, which we also put an ad in Kijiji and Facebook, and we got somebody else to come in. So there was 4 of us, and so we ended up each paying a whole lot less than we would have paid for a 1-bedroom. Now it was a rent.
And how did that go? Did everybody get along?
No, I've had to kick out people multiple times.
Oh,
and
really?
So finally,
Okay.
what ended up happening is I ended up being the main person on the lease now, which made it easier.
Okay.
And then everybody now negotiates with me. And I told my landlord about that. And so we did that. So I've ended up with some beautiful, beautiful friendships from people that I didn't know. Some have moved out and still come back to visit. And so we pretty much just turned the place into affordable housing by default, because we're just trying to just have enough money coming in every month to cover expenses. And so we've been doing that since 2016. And
2016, okay.
Yeah. So, but if you wanted to do that today, we'd probably each have to pay double what we're paying for the space, because the rents have gone up by probably, I think, if we wanted to get I don't know how much you pay for a 4-bedroom apartment in Halifax today, but I know now your 1-bedrooms are going for between 15 and 18. So it's nuts. But that's one of the sacrifices that we had to make, but it enabled us to be able to get through school, and for some other people who are going through school, or at least be able to, while you're looking for work, not draining your bank account or borrowing money from, mom and dad or whatever. But it's rough out there. We're seeing people sleeping on the streets and all this kind of stuff. So, but it's I don't know. I think we need more public housing. We need more cooperative housing, more nonprofit housing. But our government seems to be giving money to the same private developers who created the problem. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And by the way, first time calling the show.
Okay, Ifo. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's such an interesting story. Great to hear from you today. Also in Halifax today, Todd is in Halifax. Hi there, Todd. What's your housing affordability story, Todd?
I'm not calling about that because I only have a minute, but I'm calling because my wife and I have decided that if we're lucky enough to get this $250 each from the Trudeau government, that we are going to donate it to the Conservative government for the next election. So I'd like to...
All right. Well, that's not what we're talking about then, Todd. We're going to move along. No, we'll move along. I want people on the topic here today. Housing affordability is the topic today. We're talking about, what have you done in the past in order to save money on housing? That's the topic for today. We've talked a lot about those affordability checks, $250, and we can talk about them again maybe on Friday. Jackie in Calgary. Hi, Jackie. Thanks for calling, Jackie. Go ahead.
Hi there. How are you today? Hello?
I'm good, Jackie. What's your housing affordability story?
So me and my husband, we live on one income, and that's my disability income. So we keep it pretty costly because we moved into my father-in-law's house. So therefore, you know what I mean, 2 incomes only making $36,000 a year. I think that if these developers actually worried about the housing, maybe they should keep the cost down on rent. Affordable is, $1,600 to $1,800 when you're only making $17 an hour. Therefore, is it going to be affordable? Some of these houses that are going up are asking way too much. between $3,000, or a little bit less. And you have to have a roommate. Well, when you're older, we have children. Our children have moved out. One doesn't live here in the city of Calgary. The other one does. But we try to help them as much as we can. My daughter went to college. I had to pay for most of all her bills because of, she couldn't afford it when she was going to school. So my point is, if these people that are building these houses, if they actually kept the costs down, the rent down, people can stay in their houses a lot longer. So I'm saying between, $1,000 to $1,500 is a maximum on a $17 an hour job. That could be affordable, and then have roommates that kind of help that cost down a little bit more. But between $1,600 to $1,800, even for a nonprofit building, I don't think that's affordable for anybody, especially if they're on age or disability.
Right. So you're living with family then, right?
I'm actually, it's my husband and I. We moved into my father-in-law's house after my mother-in-law passed. But it is costly because because I got injured 3 years ago, and I'm fighting, other problems with it. It's costly. Sometimes I can't afford something, so I can't get it because how it is out there. But if rent was low for everybody, then everybody would have a place. And I'm not saying knock down all these houses to affordable housing. It is another thing that if they kept the rent down for everybody's sake, the newcomers that are coming to Canada, it helps them out as well. Establish them into an area.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I just think if they kept it down, rent down. Yeah. That's how I look at it.
All right, Jackie, thank you for calling from Calgary today. Yep, good to hear from you. Jackie in Calgary today, as we talk about housing affordability and ask, what are you doing? What have you done in the past in order to keep your housing costs down? Live with roommates, taking in tenants, moved, for example. Parents, older children living at home so they can save money on housing. How's that going? Give me your housing affordability story today. 1-833-668-2577. It's Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Talking about housing affordability today, we are asking, what are you doing? What have you done in the past in order to save money on housing, to lower your shelter costs? Keep housing within your own budget. Tim in Dartmouth. Thanks for calling, Tim. What's your housing affordability story? Share it with us, Tim. Go ahead.
Well, I used to share a place with about 20 other guys on an army base. Anyways, seriously, 2 years back, I have a 2-bedroom apartment, and I could afford it and all that. But one day at one of the local coffee shops, this guy, I see you around and all that, and asked me if there are any apartments for rent in my building. He just split up with his wife. I said no, and then I thought for a second. I said, I got an extra bedroom. You can have that. And I gave him a price a little under half. Best thing I ever did. Paid off debt. Now I can visit family who live outside the country. Perfect roommate. Doesn't make a mess or anything like that. Always has rent on his pension day. So everything worked out perfect.
Wow. Wow. Isn't that it? Just by chance that kind of happened?
Yeah, just by chance. You'll never know where you can find accommodation. You might find it on Kijiji, the newspaper. It could be, some guy, do you know a place? And I've seen him around. I knew he seemed to be a good guy. So I thought, hey, he gets a place to live. I get some free cash, pay off some debt, able to visit family that live halfway across the world. So it's a win-win. Someone asked me, "You ever going to move?" I said, "The only way that's going to get me out of this place is in a body bag. I got a good rent."
Oh, really? Okay, it's working out that well for you. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So it can be done. Unfortunately, not all people are so lucky, and I got to appreciate what you get.
I guess so, Joe. Tim. Thank you, Tim, for calling from Dartmouth. Let's go to Joe in Calgary. Yeah, let's go to Joe in Calgary. Joe's on the line in Calgary. Hi, Joe. What's your housing affordability story?
Probably what I'm going to say might not be too acceptable by some people, but as you can hear by my accent, I'm an immigrant. I came to Canada in 1970 and bought my first rundown, beat-up old house in Toronto for about $17,000 at that time. And I fixed it up. I sold it 4 or 5 years later for $30,000. So I got my start like that, building a dilapidated house. I came to Calgary. I bought a house at the end of '82. By the middle of '83, I couldn't have sold that house for about 2/3 of what I paid for it. This was a time when the city and the province went through a dire recession. My mortgage rate was 18.75% on a variable rate. So if you think guys are having a tough time,
the bad old days. Okay, look, just hang on the line. I'll bring you back after the news, but we're right at a time. They're going to cut us off, so we have to stop here. But I'll bring you on after the news if you stick around. 1-833-668-2577. Talkback.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Yes, it is. Housing affordability, the topic of the day. Big issue in Canada. We've been asking, what are you doing? What have you done in the past in order to save money on housing? We thought housing would be a good topic today, given the announcement from the Bank of Canada cutting interest rates. So many people hoping for lower interest rates. People with mortgages, home builders want lower interest rates. The banks love lower interest rates. Everyone wants lower interest rates. Housing. Always a hot topic on Talkback. We were speaking to Joe before the news. He's Joe's hung on there. You were talking, Joe, about a house you had owned in 1983. There was a terrible recession, and you were having some housing trouble, I guess. So why don't you go ahead?
Exactly. By 87 in Calgary, there was about 7,000 foreclosures on houses. So the house prices just collapsed completely. Lots of guys walked away from them. But in those days, Rod, if you could find a house and you could come up with cash to mortgage, then you could assume the mortgage, which is I now own a house in Linwood, and I came lucky enough. I had some money reserved, and from the first house in Haysborough, I could come up cash to mortgage, and I assumed that mortgage, which at that time was around 9.5%, which was a hell of a lot better than it had been at 18.75%. So you can't do this today. The banks have said, no, we're not having assumable mortgages. That should be a legislation. All mortgages should be assumable. The banks are making mega bucks out of this. Not only that, but when you see some of these developments going on, a developer buys a small corner lot house, and he goes along and he sticks a row of 4 townhouses on it. Now, typically, and this happened up here at where I live in Linwood, there's a row of townhouses that was sold last year. They bought a small old house, demolished it, built a 3-story, 4-block row of townhouses. Now, the poor woman that lives on the east side of that house doesn't get any sunlight in her house. Now, I reckon the cost for building those houses and purchase about $1 million to $1.4 million. Those houses cost us $600,000 a piece. You do the math yourself, Rod. 4 6s.
Yeah, sure,
right?
sure.
That's
But going back to this, because I have heard this before, just so you can explain this to me, because we haven't lived with this experience. used to be, I guess you wouldn't just buy the house, you could also take over the mortgage on that house. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Back in those days, in the 80s, you could assume the mortgage. Now, with a typical mortgage, in the first 10 years, you are paying off most of the interest. So if you could assume a mortgage that had been in place for 10 years, you were chewing away more at the principal, which makes when your mortgage comes up for renewal, the cost of the mortgage itself is not as much. So you can get the house paid off in a much faster fashion. And I've mentioned this to Tom Kimmick, my MP here, but the government just don't want to do anything about this. And it's unfortunate. The other issue with developers coming in and buying up these small, older houses, it's taken away the opportunity for many young couples to come in and buy a house that's maybe run down a little bit, and clean it up, put some sweat equity into it, maybe start the families, and then maybe upgrade at a later date. That's being taken away from a lot of young couples looking for the opportunity to get into the housing market. 25 years ago, it was very possible, yes. Today, it's impossible because the developer moves in a lot quicker than these houses get to be owned by people that are in a desperate situation to get into housing.
All right, Joe, you make some really interesting points. Thank you so much for your call. Really appreciate you hanging on there. Quite patient. Let's go to Christy in Alberta. Christy, thanks for your call. What's your housing affordability story? What have you done? What are you doing?
Well, my oldest son is in second year undergrad, and we live in a community surrounding Calgary. He's at the University of Calgary, and he lives at home with us to be able to afford to live. A, trying to find a place, and B, trying to afford a place in and around Calgary. He might as well just stay living at home. We can help him. We help him with his, vehicle costs and everything like that to get him back and forth. And some days, especially in the bad weather, the commute can be long and everything. But, it's a lot. I don't think these young kids can just leave home. They can't afford to find a place. They can't find a place, period. Back in the day, it was nice. We could move out. A few friends could get together and rent a place and move out. But it's just so difficult nowadays for these kids to be able to afford or even find a place to live.
Even with roommates?
Yep, even with roommates in Calgary and area. I mean, for like a 2-bedroom, you're paying over $2,000, a month. And, you think about even qualifying. Are they going to rent to some young kids versus are they going to rent to someone more established and such, right? If there's such a housing crunch and a lack of supply here.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Okay. And how old is your son?
He's 19. I anticipate he'll live with us until he finishes his degree, moves on, maybe even further.
Really? Okay. All right. Right. But everyone's getting along, no problems, right?
Yes. No problems.
For the most part? Yeah. That's good. Yeah. That's good. Okay. Really interesting, Christy. Thank you for hanging on there. Yep. Good to hear from you. I'd love to hear from parents with older children living at home, maybe, children in their 20s, even in their 30s. It's a big thing. It is certainly a big thing. 35% of people, but young adults, say up until the age of 30, 35% now living at home with their parents, at least one parent, according to the numbers. Also, they can save money on housing. Just how's that going? Housing affordability. That's the topic of the day. It's Talkback here on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Housing affordability. We're talking about housing affordability today. What are you doing? What have you done in the past in order to save money on housing? Lived with roommates? Do you live with roommates now? How's it going? Taking in tenants to help make your mortgage payment. What's that been like? Moved. Have you moved? Out of town, out of province to find more affordable housing? Thought about it? For example, moving to, a smaller town, for example, smaller city. People who have done that. How did that work out? Are they happy? And for parents, older children living at home, children in their 20s or 30s, so they can save money on housing, save up for a place of their own. How's that going? What are you doing? What have you done so you can save money on housing? 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577 in High River. Maggie in High River. Thanks for calling, Maggie. You're on the air.
Hi there. Back in the day when I was just newly single and had a young son, I had just a little bit of money. I took over a mortgage, and I took over a home that was in horrible shape. Walls were terrible. Light fixtures had to be changed. And so I learned how to do electrical. I learned how to fix walls. And I said, assumed a mortgage, and I brought in a roommate. So that's how I was able to afford having my own home as a single mom. Plus, I also worked 3 jobs.
And you worked 3 jobs. Oh, my goodness.
And I worked 3 jobs, but I did it. So it can be done. Except to lower your standards.
Sure. You have to lower your standards. Okay. And I guess learn how to do some handiwork around the house. You can save a lot of money when you do that, right?
Pretty much. I learned electrical, and I learned how to repair walls.
Yeah, so when you say you learned electrical, I mean, how did you learn electrical?
Well, I learned how to change light fixtures. I learned how to change, and we didn't have YouTube back then, so I had to read instructions and take out books.
Yeah. Right.
So.
Right. Because I'm not the most handy. I'm not the most handy person, and I'm always thanking YouTube. I tell my wife I'm YouTube certified.
You know what? That's what I do now. If I learned, taught myself how to change my lights in my vehicle by watching YouTube and different things like that. It's my friend now.
Yeah, but she still won't let me near anything that is electrical. That's all off limits. She's afraid I'll burn the house down. So anyway, that's kind of funny.
Your life insurance.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Thank you. It sounds like you made a lot of sacrifices. Yeah.
I did, but it was worth it.
It was worth it. Okay, Maggie, thank you. Good to hear from you. Neil is in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Neil, from Calgary. What's your housing affordability story?
Yeah, hi, Rob.
Hi there.
I lived in Calgary, and then to afford a house, I had to move outside of the city so I could afford something closer to the city. So basically, I commuted. But I really wanted to talk about my adult children who can't afford to buy a house.
Sure.
I have 4 of them. They all live in some sort of shared accommodation. One rents a room basically in a tiny house. He calls it tiny room in a tiny house, and they're wartime houses. He lives in Lethbridge actually.
Okay.
One lives in a shared accommodation with 3 I think he has 3 roommates. It's I call it a generational house. It's the grandmother passed away, and so the grandson took over renting the house, and then rents it out to 3 other people.
Okay.
My son being one of them, and they share everything, and it works out really well for them. But yeah, another son, he lives with a woman who rents out a room. It's the only way he can afford to live, and another son. He rents out a basement suite, I guess you call it, but very small basement suite.
Yeah.
And but I think that's the only way people that are 20 to 30 years old can afford a place to live, because you can't really afford a single detached home like people did in the past, maybe. So
right.
And
or even by the sounds of it, even a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment of their own.
That's right. Yeah, no, they can't really afford that. But maybe if they had better jobs or worked more or something, I don't know. But that's their situation. But I think that's the state of people in that generation. They just can't afford some of the things that maybe in the past we could have afforded in previous generations. But
yeah,
and they have to live outside of the city. Like living right in the city is not an option because it's just way too expensive. And maybe that's just a Calgary thing, but.
Oh no, that's not a Calgary thing. That's a big city thing. That's just a big city thing, I think, these days.
Yeah, exactly.
And not even so much, big city thing. It's just kind of an urban thing right now.
Yeah.
Like what it's
so,
kind of sad.
So I have a house for sale right now, and
okay.
And the people that are looking at it want to, cut it up into suites or whatever and rent it out.
Oh, okay. Right.
But if you do the economics on it, you can't. Like it's a single detached home with just paying the mortgage on it, depending on how much money you have to put down, I guess. But it's not a good investment to do that. And so they eventually come to that conclusion and don't want to buy the house. So really, a single detached home is for, I think, a single family that can afford it. It's not for somebody that in the past who would have taken the house, divided it into 2 or 3 suites, and rented them out because the house price is just too high to justify doing that versus the rent.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting, Neil. We've got to run. Thank you so much for your call, sharing your experience. Great to hear from you. 1-833-668-2577. Join the discussion. Talking about housing affordability options and strategies today. What you've done in the past, what you're doing now. Keep a roof over your head. 1-833-668-2577. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Housing affordability, our topic of the day, as we ask, what are you doing? What have you done in the past in order to save money on housing? In Cape Breton, Roman, you're on the air, Roman. What's your story,
How's it
Roman?
going today?
Everything's fine, Roman. Thank you.
Good. Actually, I'm in Cape Breton for work, but I actually live in Halifax. And recently, my who's 25, she's gone back. She's going to law school. So she was living in downtown Halifax, had an apartment, $2,400 a month. She's moved in with us now while she's going to school. And, so it's working not too bad, but it's kind of the sign of the times. And when she was working for the federal government, she had quite a good salary, 60 plus or whatever. And she was saying she'll be able to afford a house, which is, very sad. But I think that's a state of what we're at right now, that kids just won't be able to afford to buy houses, and moving in parents and grandparents and all that is kind of what's going on everywhere, as you can tell from your callers and just talking to friends.
Wow, $2,400 a month, and that was for an apartment in pretty much downtown Halifax?
Yeah, 2-bedroom, her and a roommate, both working. And so she was going back to law school at Dalhousie, so she asked if she could move back in with us. She'd lived with us before, and we said, sure, no problem. And, she's an adult, so it works out not too bad, and everyone's happy. But it's, very sad situation, as, you keep hearing.
Yeah, very interesting. Definitely. Okay. But, but still making pretty good money in Halifax is still... with the rents, I guess, having to get a roommate. There you go. Just save money on housing. Yeah,
it is for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Roman. Good to hear from you. In Halifax today, Callum in Halifax. Hi, Callum. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, Callum. Thanks. What's your housing affordability story? What are you doing?
For the last year, I've been working 7 days, about 12 to 15 hours a day.
Oh, my gosh.
My wife works 6 days a week, and we have 3 kids.
Oh, my gosh. Do you ever see them?
In glimpses.
In glimpses, yeah. My goodness.
That's where young families have been pushed to now. Average rent around here in Halifax is $2,300 to $2,600, and minimum wage is 15 and some change. They said that an affordable or a livable wage here in Halifax is 28 and some change.
Right. And you've
But
got a big
nobody
family.
makes that
You've
here.
got to house 5 people. Like,
Yep.
what's that costing these days?
Way too much. And
Way
it goes
too
up
much.
every few months.
Right. So when I say, what are you doing to try and keep a roof over your head? You're working yourself into the ground. That's what you would say?
Yep, pretty much. I'm not alone.
Wow. Okay. All right. We're going to end this hour on that note. Pick it up right after the news.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Housing affordability. That's our topic for the day. We are asking what you're doing or what you've done in the past in order to save money on housing. Keep a roof over your head. For example, live with roommates. You live with roommates now, live with roommates in the past. Have you taken in tenants in order to help you make your mortgage payments? What's that been like? Have you moved to a place with more affordable housing? Maybe thought about it? Moving, say, to a smaller town or even a different province? I know lots of people who have done that. Do you know people who have done that? How'd that work out? Are they happy that they moved and they're saving money on their housing costs? And parents with older children living at home in their 20s or 30s so they can save money on housing. How's that going? What are you doing or what have you done so that you can save money on housing? 1-833-668-2577. It's hour number 2 of Talkback. Ernie is in Kitchener. Thanks for calling, Ernie. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, Rob. The consensus that I'm kind of hearing with how it seems like how anyone really got ahead is they started with the roommate thing. And it's kind of, so I'm 40 now. My wife and I, before we got married, we were renting in Kitchener here. And I just remember being like, man, I hate just throwing this money away. Like, we're not gaining anything from this. Like, let's get some roommates. We can suck it up and let's do that. So we did that for 2 to 3 years until we were able to buy our first home. We were 25 when we got our first home. And I remember thinking, we looked at a bunch of single detached homes outside of town because we couldn't afford anything in the city. And I'm like, you know what? We're going to kind of be stuck here. I'm like, it was really nice having somebody pay for something, but let's do it again. So we purposely purchased a duplex then and said, this is not going to be our forever home, but you know what? We like the fact that why doesn't somebody help us pay our mortgage? So we did that. We lived there for 7 years, had no kids, saved up until we were able to get a house that we really liked and be able to, at that, we were lucky enough that we were still able to keep the duplex because of the rental income. So we were able to offset that, and then we started our family with a house, and then we were able to do it that way. So we're basically thinking, you know, it wasn't our ideal living situation, but more or less thinking ahead of what's our goals, how can we attain it? If it's just you and I, yeah, it'd be nice to have something where it's just you and I right now, but can we suck it up for a few years, get some money from somebody else, and then do what we want to do? So it was that thinking that's how we got to where we are, you know? So
Wow. And where do you think that comes from with you that you had the kind of the wisdom at such a young age to do that? I have to tell you, at 25, I was kind of a bit of quite frankly, I was a bit of a hellraiser at 25. I wasn't really interested in that kind of stuff, but it sounds like it's really worked out for you. I wonder where that comes from. You're so disciplined.
I got to say there was a lot of luck that definitely happened with the market at that time. Like there was no huge recessions or anything like that drove rates crazy high or anything, but I think a big part of it was just thinking. I remember how hard it was to get that first house and how difficult it was to save up and thinking, if we don't do this, it's going to be harder later on. We're young now. We've got to do this now if we really want to be able to enjoy where we want to be later on. So it was more or less like, okay, if it's hard now, if you don't do it now, then we just got to accept where we're at. And if we're happy where we're at, yeah, we can accept renting forever. But if we're not and we want to do something better, what do we have to do to get to move that step ahead? So that was our thinking together, and it's almost always been a little bit of an entrepreneurial brain in my head there. I was just kind of thinking of how can I get someone to help me offset my costs.
Right. Okay. Yeah, excellent. And that duplex, you still have that place?
Yes, we do.
You still have that place? Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? Okay.
Yeah.
Really interesting story there, Ernie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, it's really uplifting. Kevin in Calgary. I hope I'm saying that all right. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hello?
Yeah, hi there.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I was hearing halfway through the radio. I didn't actually hear the whole thing, what you guys are looking to hear from folks. But anyways, when it comes to housing affordability, I'll say it's really tough, especially for low-income Albertans and Canadians like me who are on social assistance such as AISH or income support.
So then let me ask you, what do you do in order to keep a roof over your head? How are you making ends meet in order to stay housed?
Yeah, me currently, I thank God, I'm receiving housing subsidy through the city of Calgary, like Calgary Housing Company. But for other people, I bet it would have been hard for them. And the wait list, even I heard, is very long for Calgary housing here in the city of Calgary. And in the last budget talk, they didn't even mention how long the wait list is.
Yeah. Now, with your rent supplement, just how does that work? I'm curious to know how that works. So, are you living in like a, say, Calgary public housing? Are you living with a like in a private situation where you get
city-owned?
City-owned.
I live in a city-owned Calgary housing company apartment.
Right. And how's the upkeep on that? Do you find it okay?
Yeah, so far, yes, but I heard recently, I don't know, they're going to change some rules, especially it's going to go to RGI, rent gear to income. I don't know how that's going to work.
How that will work, okay.
But it's going to be changing soon. And, really, I'm on AISH again. And I heard probably in 2025, Canadians with disabilities who get who receive the DTC disability tax credit will get a CDB, Canadian disability benefit, in the amount of $200 a month.
Yeah, it's an extra $200 a month. Yeah,
but that's going to be insufficient. 200 plus 30% of it or higher will go towards rent, and there needs to be also rent caps in Alberta.
Okay, look, I thank you. I'm glad you're doing okay. And thanks for your call today, Kevin, in Calgary. It's tough out there for people on social assistance. My gosh, in some of the big cities, you look at what the rents are. If you're on a monthly stipend like that, how do you ever even begin to afford, say, a market rent? I'll be right back. It's housing affordability. That's our topic for the day on Talkback, Wednesday edition, 1-833-668-2577. Feel free to join the discussion. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Housing affordability, the topic of the day. We're asking, what are you doing? What have you done in order to save money on housing? Kyle in Listowel on the air. Kyle.
I'm a millennial, and I moved from Niagara to Listowel because of how expensive Niagara has gotten. So I actually moved to a small little basement apartment just outside of Waterloo for a couple of years, saved money, and then I had enough money to put a down payment on a home in Listowel, and it was significantly a lot more affordable than it would to be living in a big city. Now, do I have all the amenities like a big city has? No, but I live comfortably. I don't have to worry about, making a mortgage payment or things like that. But for me, it was just, I'm 35 now. So it took me, 10 years just for me to buy my first house in my 30s compared to, my parents buying their houses when they were in their 20s, So I've, you just got to adjust and understand where you go. But yeah, I think for now, obviously it's not my forever home, living in a wartime home. I'd love to eventually live in the country with a big house, but you got to start somewhere. So this is where I started, this small wartime home there, Rob.
That's cool.
Yep.
So people who aren't from that area around where you live, what's it like? Listowel. Ontario. What's that like?
Do you ever see the show Letterkenny? Because that's what it's based off of. That's exactly what Listowel is.
Okay.
No, but I'm not joking. Like you go down. Like a lot of my friends are Mennonite, and they have horses and buggies and stuff. And they I love them. Like they're the funniest people you ever meet. Like they have a great sense of humor. I do all my work through them. But you know what? It's fun. Like you have the hockey rink only holds 3,500 people or less than that. And you got 900 people or 700 people showing up to watch a junior B game. So it's fun.
Cool. Yeah,
so
that's
it's just,
good.
Yeah,
and you like it.
It's a small community, right? Like that's exactly it. If you're used to a big city, you go to a small town, you're going to get a little bit of a culture shock. But it's the same thing.
Oh yes.
No different than somebody moving from a small town to a big city, right? So, but I love it. I mean, it's growing. So there you go, Rob.
Cool. Thank you, Kyle. That's a great story. Great story. Yeah. Thank you so much. Ryan is in Alberta. Ryan, thanks for calling, Ryan.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Ryan, what's your housing affordability story?
Honestly, I don't really. I've heard everyone else talking on there, and I've heard the struggles people are having. I don't see it changing until the government steps in and makes some necessary changes to make housing more affordable. I've heard of rent caps and stuff like that, but realistically, they need to stop. I'm out of Red Deer. My parents just sold their house. They had it on the market for almost a year at $470. They ended up selling for $440. The business that bought it wasn't an individual. A business out of Toronto bought the house, and all they did is they took the sign down and put another sign up for sale, didn't paint it, didn't do anything to the house, didn't do any improvements, just relisted it for $100,000 more than what they bought it for. So I think government needs to regulate what type of businesses are purchasing single-family homes. I don't think businesses should be able to purchase single-family homes. I think stuff like this that happened to my parents, and it didn't really happen to them, it's just what was done after they sold, prices that house out for people that could typically afford it. They just jacked it up. I think out-of-country investment should be limited. I don't think if you're not going to live in a single-family home, I don't think you should be permitted to buy a single-family home. And that's happening quite a bit on the West Coast.
Okay.
So I think the government needs to regulate who is buying single-family homes and limit it to single-family purchases. There can be a few exceptions. I know there's a lot of landlords out there. I was one for a period of time as well, where you could cap it. Five single properties or whatever. But you need to reduce the prices overall of the houses that's being inflated by business. And it's, unfortunately, this is also a hot topic, immigration. It comes down to supply and demand. We need to restrict the amount of people coming into the country until we have adequate houses. And I'm not saying stop immigration.
No. Even the government recognizes that now, Ryan. Even the government recognizes that now. The government is trying to put the toothpaste back into the tube now, and this has been like the most pro-immigration government ever in the history of Canada, right? So even they recognize now that they went too far.
100%. No, and it's a supply and demand thing. We have too many people fighting over
too few
housing
houses
that isn't available.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think
that's really interesting about this company though that bought your parents' house and then just put it up for sale like the very next day, didn't do anything to it for $100,000 more.
Flipping it, and if they get $20,000 or $30,000 extra out of it, but obviously they're a large company, they can afford to sit on it, and it's still sitting vacant now.
Right.
But I don't think that kind of business should be permitted.
Yeah, and maybe if it was, for sale for $100,000 less, maybe there's a family living in that house right now.
I guarantee there would be.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you, Ryan.
I think the government needs to put restrictions in place to help single families and those looking to get into the housing market.
Yeah. I have heard of that happening, but you're the first person I've talked to that actually has personal experience with it. Thank you for your call, Ryan, as we talk about housing affordability on the Talkback today at 1-833-668-2577. Be right back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Housing affordability. What are you doing to keep your housing costs down? Which strategies have you employed? Let's go to Eric in Halifax. Eric, you're on the air. Hi there, Eric.
How you doing today, Rob?
I'm good, Eric. Thanks for calling.
Can I say something personal, and then I'll get to the affordability of housing and rent controls and all that? I tried my damnedest to do affordable. I owned a house one time, and I took in the outlaws, and that was the worst mistake I've ever made. And then, after all that was said and done, we had it out, and we decided to sell the house. Since then, I went to different agencies and all that, and they helped me out. And thank God they did, because I'm doing fairly well today.
That's
and as far as the governments are concerned, please don't take the caps off, because if they do, we'll be in a dire straits as far as trying to keep our head above water. I mean, like I said, I'm doing fairly well today because of different, people helping me. So that's just what I have to say. Governments, don't do nothing to upset the cookie jar. Just leave it the way it is, and everybody will be fine.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the government's running a big deficit right now. I mean, it could be a $60 billion deficit, a $1.3 trillion debt. I mean, these bills are going to be passed down to the next generation. Aren't you? Isn't that something you're worried about? Things like that?
Yes, the kids are going to pay for it, and Trudeau, spending money like it's like drinking water. I mean,
you're saying don't close the taps. You're saying just keep those taps open.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, we're living in tough times, and if we get introduced to higher rents and everything else, we'll be in very, very bad situation. I mean, some of us are doing fairly well. Some of us are hurting, bad. But I think if they don't rock the boat, I think we'll be all right.
All right, Eric. Thank you for calling from Halifax. I'm glad you're doing okay. William in Calgary. Hi, William.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good, William. What's your housing affordability story trying to keep housing costs down?
Well, that's an interest rate situation. My wife and I, when we bought our first place, we basically scrimped and saved to get it back in 2003.
Wow, okay.
Okay, and we used the RRSP first-time home buyers program.
Okay.
That was quite helpful. Paid that debt back. Paid the house off, but going forward, buying other houses was much more difficult. We were able to do so, but I think the affordability of Canadian housing right now is relevant to the interest rates that people have to pay.
Right. Well, hopefully the mortgage rates will come down with these Bank of Canada reductions. Big move from the Bank of Canada today on that, 50 basis points.
Yeah.
Back to back, 50 basis points, right? So
yeah. Agreed.
Down to
so
3.25%. We'll see, how that translates into mortgages. We talked to a mortgage broker today. We're going to play that in about 20 minutes. Said, probably the next little while you'll start seeing for most of the popular mortgages, a 4 in front of it. It's better than a 6 or a 7.
Oh,
right?
It's devastating. The effect of the interest rates. I'll just share with you what happened to us. We got further into real estate ownership through the years, and by doing so, we accumulated more and more mortgage debt. And these were rental properties, understand that, right? Okay. And so we're running a long-term rental
let's just
program.
stop. Let's just stop. We'll pick up the story right after the news. Just hang on. Just be a few minutes. We'll be right back. I'm curious to hear the end of this story. This is Talkback.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
We have been talking about housing affordability today and asking what people have been doing to save money on housing. William, with us on the line. You had some rental properties, William, and with the higher interest rates, been pretty tough, as I understand it. Is that right?
That's correct. I actually had a couple of seconds here to get my notes together. So we acquired these rental properties over a period of 15 years, my wife and I, from 2003 to 2018. And we were carrying about $2 million worth of mortgage debt at that point in time.
Wow.
So that's the start of it, right? So your interest rates on $2 million at 3% a year is about $60,000 in interest, right?
Wow. Okay. I'll take your word for it.
So that's a ballpark number there, Rob.
Okay.
The interest rates accelerated so quickly at the end of 2021 to 2022 up to 7%. So then on $2 million worth of mortgage debt, you're paying $140,000 in interest. That's a differential of an $80,000 increase in about 3 to 6 months in our business model, and it destroyed the business model.
So what did you do?
We had to sell the properties.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, we had four plexes out on Vancouver Island in Victoria.
Okay.
They're gone.
Okay. And they're gone. Wow,
Yeah.
Just like that. Like 20-some years worth of work.
Gone by Trudeau government interest rates.
Man, oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. Are you going to try again? Start over, maybe?
No.
No?
No.
Now, people would say, well, why didn't you just raise the rent?
That's a very good question. The BC government has rent control in place, and you can't raise the rent past 1.5 to 2% per year.
Right. Even though your costs went, up, whatever you said, $80,000 in a few months, right?
That's correct. Yeah. We would be paying people to live in our houses, Rob, and as an ordinary civilian, we're just a mom and pop team here, and we don't have big finance. We couldn't do it. We had to sell.
Couldn't do it. Wow, that's a heck of a story. Well,
Justin Trudeau destroyed our financial future.
Man, oh man, that is terrible. Okay, thank you for your call, William. Okay, that's a bit of an eye-opener, isn't it? My goodness. There was just a report released about rents across Canada, nationwide. So, David, I guess the good news is the average rent nationwide is at a 15-month low. So that's the good news. The bad news is that it's still $2,139 a month. That is the 15-month low for the average rents across the country.
Yeah. And if I could say something, just tell a little story for myself, Rob. That last caller got me thinking about it. I rent my apartment from a couple. They're in their late 40s, early 50s. They have a family at home. This is just an investment for them. They just own the one house. It's got 2 apartments in it. Okay. And they're fantastic landlords. In Ontario, we have rent control as well. And when our landlord raised our rent this year by the allowable 2.5%, because he's a very nice guy, he was very apologetic about having to raise the rent, but he shared with us that their operating costs for the property, with the higher natural gas bill to heat and the higher rate on the mortgage, has increased by $400 a month in the last 2.5 years. And over that same period, they've only been able to raise the rent by about $140 a month.
Right. Isn't that something, eh?
So they're essentially underwater on the investment.
They're underwater.
Just hoping that when they go to sell.
And this guy had to sell his properties.
Yeah,
right?
They're hoping
had to sell his property.
Down the road when they go to sell the property that they'll recoup some of those costs. But that's the risk that people are facing now.
Okay. All right. Yeah, good call there, David. And then, sometimes landlords will get, the landlords are greedy landlords, right? And they're raising the rents. And people don't consider the costs of actually operating a rental property, like William explained so well in Calgary. Wade is in Sylvan Lake. Wade, hi there, Wade.
Rob, how goes your day?
Everything's fine here, Wade. How are things with you?
Oh, pretty good.
That's good.
Housing affordability, well, the government play a large part with their interest rates and stuff, and things they can't say out loud. For example, it's probably a whole lot of big dollars coming in from China buying up all these properties, which drives the property values up. But there was a time, if you may remember, when trailer courts were a fairly big thing. You could buy your trailer, you could put it on somebody's trailer park lot and pay your lot rent, and you could live a fairly decent life, I would think. I never lived in one, but but the other part, besides the greed, is like what do people actually really need anymore? Like, I live in this house here in Selvin. It's 100 years old. I don't have a dishwasher. I do not have air conditioning. I have nothing really fancy because you really don't need anything fancy. I do not have a smartphone, as you may know.
I know,
and what are the costs of them? But what is it that people actually really need?
Oh, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting nice things. So,
absolutely not.
All right.
No.
Some luxuries in life, especially if you work hard for them, right?
Yeah, you
yourself.
betcha.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if anybody's give it some thought. But take a household of, I don't know, say 5 people, mom, dad, 3 kids. They've all got $1,000 smartphone. Do you really need a smartphone? For example, that's one example. I don't think, I grew up in this country. I lived in Saskatchewan, and I've lived in Alberta. I've lived in BC. And, it gets pretty smoking hot in the summertime, but I never saw a need to purchase an air conditioner.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Wade.
Things like that.
A man of very modest means in Sylvan Lake. Wade, one of our frequent callers. Good to hear from you today. We'll be right back. Mary, you hang on the line in Kitchener, Mary. Looking forward to taking your call, getting your say. Housing affordability, the sacrifices that people are making to keep that roof over their heads. 1-833-668-2577. It's Talkback. It's News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Housing affordability. We've been talking about housing affordability and what people are doing or what they've done in the past in order to save money on housing. 1-833-668-2577. Mary on the line. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Rob.
How are you?
Rob, you might not
Yes.
like what I'm going to talk about, but
it's
Rob,
okay.
I'm in my 80s.
Yes. That's okay.
So bear in mind what time I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been the 50s. Yeah?
Okay.
You might not like it, but my parents, they rented out the upstairs of our home to get the home.
To tenants. Yes.
Yeah. And when my third sibling was born, there were only two bedrooms. Well, anyway, he was put in the bottom drawer of something. And from there on, every Saturday night, my mom would have to go up and ask the tenant, "Can I bring my children up for a bath?" And we all bathed in the same water.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Oh my God, yes. Today
Isn't that something?
Well, it's not something. We lived through it, and it wasn't bad. My husband never slept on the sheet till he was in the Army when he was 20. Like, come on, Rob. We've gotten too soft.
We're too soft, really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But it's very expensive now, of course. It's very expensive.
No. Wasn't it? Why did my parents rent out the top of their house? Because they couldn't make the payments.
Yeah.
Well, is anybody willing today to do that and take a bath upstairs?
I don't know about. Yeah, I don't know about going to take a bath in the roommate's bath water. I mean, I don't know if I'd be down for something like that. I'm as miserly as the next person, but I don't know if I would want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the best thing we ever had was getting a piece of ice off the ice truck for the ice box.
Right.
Okay, Rob.
Well, you're going
Here's
way
an
back,
old
Mary.
woman.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, life throws curveballs at you. You just kind of have to roll with it. You have to make sacrifices. And, we've heard it. It can mean getting roommates. It can mean, in Mary's case, taking in tenants. As I said, my parents did that. We had a spare bedroom growing up. We took in a tenant, did help around the house, childcare, housework in exchange for lodging. Great experience when I think about it now. I do wonder how common that is these days. And I've moved from the big city to a small village, actually. And I know lots of people who have moved. I know lots of people who say couldn't afford Metro Halifax anymore. Moved to other parts of Nova Scotia, small town Nova Scotia. Certainly know some people who have moved out of Vancouver because, housing costs are just insane. Some of them moved to places in northern British Columbia or into communities in the interior. They packed up everything and everyone and they moved to Alberta. My good friend Chris Sims, who is on the show from time to time from Taxpayers Federation, left the Lower Mainland. Too expensive. Living in Lethbridge these days in Alberta and loving it. And, of course, growing up on Cape Breton Island, lots of people moved to Alberta, although that was more for work than because of anything having to do with housing. But, I mean, it's a thing. It is a thing. 14,000 young people left Toronto last year. Just packed it up and left it all behind because Toronto's just too darn expensive. People leaving expensive cities behind, moving to smaller cities in other provinces, moving to smaller towns, or opting for rural life because they just can't afford it anymore. They're sick and tired of being house poor or rent poor and making the landlord rich. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Clinton Wilkins, mortgage broker out of Halifax, Dartmouth, and he's going to tell us about what this means if you're in the market for a mortgage. Big Bank of Canada news today, of course, about rates, 50 basis point cut today from the Bank of Canada down to 3.25%. That's the Bank of Canada rate. So what does that mean? If you're out there looking for, a variable or a fixed, a 3-year, a 5-year, we'll tell you coming up next. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.
Something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Again, one of the reasons that we're talking about housing again today is because of the Bank of Canada's big rate announcement. It's another jumbo rate cut, 50 basis point cut to the overnight rate to end the year. So for homeowners, let's talk about what all of this means for mortgages and other mortgage options right now with Clinton Wilkins of the Clinton Wilkins Mortgage Team. Great to hear from you.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
What'd you think of the news today?
I think it's great news for homeowners. I think it's great news for anyone that's going to be getting a mortgage, or if there's any clients that have a variable rate mortgage or a home equity line of credit, they're going to see their cost of borrowing go down, which is obviously very favorable. Great news in December. It's a bit of a gift, I think, from the Bank of Canada. Borrowers that are in a variable rate mortgage product will see their payments go down or their amortization get shorter. I think it's good news going into 2025.
Okay. So what is this doing to the market right now, the demand for mortgage products right now, Clinton? What's your experience and what are you expecting?
The demand is not as high as it has been previously. I think in different markets across the country, Rob, you would see kind of different results. I know in Ontario and BC, it's still very, very soft compared to previous years. The rate's still being high. I think this is obviously good news for, anybody who's looking to, buy a home or even sell a home. I think there's going to be more demand. I think starting the end of last year, we had a lot of people that were sitting on the sidelines. I think, one, because the cost of borrowing was high, but B, they couldn't afford it. They couldn't qualify. The stress test with the rates being high really limited the affordability, and that took a lot of the demand out of the market. So I think with these rates going down, obviously it will positively impact clients qualifying as well. Clients will qualify for a higher mortgage now with a variable rate mortgage product today than they would have yesterday. So I think that is good news. The one thing that we're obviously going to continue to watch is, the Canadian dollar. We're going to be watching the GDP and the employment numbers. That's really going to impact the next rate announcement, which will be at the end of January. I'm keeping a close eye on what's going on in the U.S. Obviously, the political and economic situation in the U.S. may not tie one-to-one on what's going on here in Canada, but obviously it can have significant impacts, and that can impact the Bank of Canada decision that will happen here at the end of January.
Okay, so what have been popular mortgage options for buyers or people renewing, and how could today's decision from the bank affect that?
I would say there was a big shift into a 3-year fixed rate product. I would say that's the most popular product that any bank or mortgage professional would talk about kind of leading up to the last couple of months. There certainly has been a big shift into clients taking a variable rate mortgage product, primarily because there's a lot of optimism. Borrowers continue to think that the Bank of Canada will continue to soften the key overnight rate, and the variable will be, in fact, cheaper than a fixed rate, but the optimism is high that we're going to continue seeing, cuts in the future and into 2025. So I really encourage any borrowers that are thinking about doing a mortgage to think about a variable. There are some huge pros. If you were to break that variable mortgage early, you would pay a penalty of only 3 months interest, which is great. And you can also convert any variable rate mortgage product into a fixed rate. So there certainly are some big upsides. And for those borrowers that are in a fixed, I think we need to remember, if you're exiting your term early, especially if you had your variable or your fixed rate the last year or two, it's been quite high. My big concern is anybody exiting a fixed rate early could see much higher penalties than they've been used to in the past.
So after today's move from the central bank, what kind of rates are you expecting for the more popular mortgage products?
I think any borrower that is going to be getting a variable rate, they're going to see anywhere in, a prime minus 0.9 would be a very good rate. So we're going to be seeing rates in the, low to mid 4s. I think that's a great place to be. I would say the majority of mortgages, regardless of it being fixed or variable, will start with a 4 right now here in 2024. I think going into 2025, I think a lot of borrowers and mortgage professionals are optimistic that we will start seeing rates start with a 3, but that might be some time off yet right now, Rob.
Okay. Well, we shall speak to you in the new year when the Bank of Canada makes its next decision. I really appreciate hearing from you again today. Enjoy the rest of your day, Clinton. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Have a great day and happy holidays.
Same to you. That's Clinton Wilkins of the Clinton Wilkins Mortgage Team. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. It's Talkback today here on News Radio.